This is Mike Tatarski, host of the Vietnam Weekly podcast, coming to you from Ho Chi Minh City. I also write the Vietnam Weekly newsletter for those of you that aren't aware. If you've paid much attention to Vietnam news this year, and I assume you have if you're listening to this, you'll know it was an exceptionally dramatic period for Vietnamese politics, following a couple of years that were already pretty busy. This is a topic that in years past was frankly boring, at least publicly. From President Vo Van Thung's resignation in March and the ouster of Vuong Dinh Hue, the National Assembly chairman, the following month, both as part of the Blazing Furnace anti-corruption campaign, to Nguyen Phu Trong's death in July and To Lam's subsequent ascent to general secretary, it's not hyperbole to call 2024 one of, if not the, most consequential years for national politics in modern Vietnamese history. And things really aren't slowing down. A dramatic streamlining of the lumbering state bureaucracy is now being planned, with General Secretary Lam pushing an aggressive timeline that could see numerous ministries merged and many state agencies streamlined or eliminated within the first half of next year. This is a lot to unpack, and it's worth looking back at the year that was, while also looking ahead to the coming year, especially with the next National Congress, the Communist Party's biggest event held every 5 years, scheduled for early 2026. Today's guest will be familiar to many of you. Nguyen Cac Giang is a visiting fellow at the Vietnam Studies program under the IC's Yusof Ishak Institute in Singapore. He was on the show back in March for a conversation about the anti-corruption campaign, right around the time President Thung stepped down, and he's one of my go-to voices for insight on Vietnamese politics. We discussed the legacy of this year, again, arguably the most consequential in modern history, To Lam's strong performance as General Secretary so far, the significant streamlining of both the government and the party being planned for next year, what this could mean for the National Congress in early 2026, and what to look out for in the coming months, among other topics. As always, if you have any comments, feedback, or guest ideas, get in touch at matatarski@gmail.com. Let's get to my conversation with Giang. Giang, thanks so much for coming back on the podcast.
My pleasure. It's great to be here again with you.
Yeah, definitely. Good to have you back. So this has been a big year for Vietnamese politics, or politics in Vietnam, of course, as most listeners will be familiar with. But before we get to the big stories, I wondered if there's anything significant you think happened that maybe didn't get discussed as much or maybe got missed by people.
Yeah, I totally agree with you that in the past year in Vietnam, there have been too many things that catch our eye, from politics to economics to foreign policy. Putin visited Hanoi, Tolam visiting Beijing and Washington, no, not Washington, but New York. But I think one of very important facts that I think would be very important for the medium and long term for Vietnam and many businesses that want to invest in Vietnam is that Vietnam has reached 100 million people milestone in the past year. So I think this represents a really important demographic transition for the country. And if you look at the democratic structure of Vietnam and the declining fertility rates, with that, on other opportunities of rising urbanization and also middle class expansion, I think would represent both a challenge and an opportunity for Vietnam to reshape its economic model, and also an opportunity for businesses around the world to look at Vietnam not as a base to manufacture things and export to US or to the West, but also a very important market in the future.
Yeah, it's a great thing to point out. Probably something worth a future podcast episode as well. I know demographics are getting a lot of attention. I know city officials, at least here in Ho Chi Minh City, are concerned. The city has a declining birth rate, which I think is common around the world as places develop and get more wealthy. People have fewer children. It's expensive, but it's definitely something to keep an eye on. So thanks for highlighting that. So now kind of moving on to more political issues. This year, again, I would consider it probably the biggest year in recent history, politics-wise. I know we've had a few recent ones with big events. Feel free to weigh in on that. But from, high-level turnover earlier in the year, president stepping down, National Assembly chairman stepping down, obviously Nguyen Phu Trong passing away, and then the rise of Tolam as now general secretary. What do you think the legacy of this year will be, given kind of all these major events?
Well, I mean, potentially for all the Vietnam observers, it's potentially the biggest year ever. Even like if you look at the Vietnam before the unification of Vietnam before đổi mới, there's no big year as as big as this one with all of those turbulence at the top of the echelon of Vietnamese political system. And I think to properly quote Lenin in this, he said that there are decades when nothing happened, and there are, let's say, months when decades happen. And this is exactly what happens in Vietnam in the past year because it's fundamentally changed everything from the institutional arrangement of Vietnamese politics post đổi mới in 2000 in 1986, all the norms of elections, all the taboos, all the no-go zones. When you are disciplined leaderships, you never touch the Politburo members, and then you see 7 or 8 Politburo members stepping down because of anti-corruption investigations, and then you see a lot of let's say strong men who rose through the military and the security apparatus and occupying all the important positions in Vietnamese politics. And with that, we still have a year to go to the 2026 Party Congress. And so what we are seeing now is that we see a total breakdown of the previous institutional arrangement, including norms, regulations, taboos, no-go zones. And yet we haven't really seen a very concrete and very solid emergence of a new institutional arrangement. And I think that we might still have to wait until 2026 to see what kind of arrangement that we might see emerge from that. But nevertheless, I think if you look at all of those things happen in the past year, definitely there will be a lot of things to watch on the next party congress, especially on the power consolidation, on the streamlining of the bureaucracy, and on how the party would solve the dilemma of overlapping bureaucracies between the party system and the state system. And we are seeing now, of course, the streamlining efforts by Tolam and by Prime Minister Phạm Minh Chính. But what emerged after that would be a really big, big question. So I think I'm sorry to say I don't really have concrete answers for all of that, but definitely that's something we have to really keep a close eye on, until the next party congress.
And we'll certainly talk more in a minute about the streamlining that's being discussed and the party congress as well. But obviously, you mentioned Tolam. I mean, we both mentioned him. But what's your assessment of his performance so far as, I guess, a general secretary? He was for a little while held that and the presidency. Now he's just general secretary, but he's certainly been, it seems like he's traveling around Vietnam a lot, bringing up really important issues. I mean, spearheading this streamlining, which we'll get to. So, what have you thought of him so far?
No, I think he hasn't not only traveled a lot in Vietnam, but also he traveled to many countries. And I think given the very low expectations that we had on him when he first rose to the power, I think he's doing quite well. Especially if you consider the circumstances that he was first elected as a president, and then the Jansec in early August. A lot of political turbulence. The system was in disarray. There were a lot of uncertainties about the po- political positions inside the system, doubt of his intentions, whether he wanted to consolidate power, whether he wanted to merge the presidency and the Gensec position. I think he's doing quite well. Um, we can talk from the political point of view. If you look at his the way that he actually maneuvered the system perfectly by installing many of his proteges and allies in very important positions, from Lương Tâm Quang, the Minister of Public Security, to Nguyễn Duy Ngọc, to the Chief of Staff of the Central Committee. Both were Tolam's right-hand man when he was the Minister of Public Security. So in the battlefront, he has a very strong position to do whatever he wants when he install his proteges at very important, positions like that. And then he also installed many other allies and associates to the Ministry of Justice and to the Central Inspection Commission. So he set the ground very well to politically do whatever he wants to, pursue his agenda. But then he doesn't really. What he did is quite surprising in a way that he doesn't really abuse his power to really consolidate his power, at least nominally. So he had the presidency, but then he ceded that position to a very strong faction as well, the military faction, to give it to Lương Khương, the a general from the military. And then he also traveled to the south, meeting, the old guards, party elders, especially former Prime Minister Nguyễn Tấn Dũng, and then he showed his willingness to cooperate and to, make concessions. And so I think for in just a few months, he actually consolidated his power quite well, and also he maintained the solidarity among the party system, which is quite important because you cannot really move the country forward and the party forward if you can't build a strong, network of alliance within the system. Because Vietnam is very different from other authoritarian regimes because it really requires, regional solidarity in order to really push forward any kind of policies. And if you look at other aspect, foreign policy, for example, he visited China only 2 weeks after getting elected as his NSEC, and then a few weeks later, he visited New York, meeting with uh, U.S. President Joe Biden, and then he traveled widely to other places before he, ceded the presidency to Lương Khương. And he maintained quite well the Vietnam's hedging strategy between other powers, but also he's willing to step up, especially if you look at the case of the fishermen, being attacked by Chinese coast guards. Vietnam was very quick to openly criticize China on that, and which is quite rare, especially given the past decade. Vietnam has been quite, let's say, less vocal in openly criticizing China on the South China Sea disputes. And then in terms of economy, I think it's very important to note that the economy, despite the fact that statistically we see everything is going fine, but I think there is strong sense of, let's say, uncertainty among the private sector and some business, some foreign investors because of the bureaucratic paralysis, there's the fear of the anti-corruption investigations. And what Tolam did was that you know, he he stood in front, the private, businesses, and he said that we do not let anti-corruption investigation hinder economic growth. And he sent a lot of positive signals to support private businesses and economic growth. And because of that, at least for the past few months, if you look at the property market in Vietnam and other signals about, manufacturing index, I think the economy has slowly regained confidence. So all of that, given the fact that only 6 months into his first tenure as presidency first and then sec. I think he's doing quite well. I potentially give him an 8 out of 10 if I can.
So Lam again has been very busy, and now this government streamlining effort, which you've referenced a couple times since we started, has really taken over media coverage here. It's getting talked about at seems like pretty much every level, almost every time I check a Vietnamese news site, there's something about it. And of course, again, Lam has been discussing this repeatedly, and along with Prime Minister Chin. So this is kind of a complex topic, but where did this come from, and why now? And I do want to have you in a minute or two kind of explain what some of the proposals are. But first of all, just like what is this, and where did it come from?
But I think first it's important to note that Vietnam is a communist country, and because of the legacy that it had from the centrally planned economy before the cold, during the Cold War, Vietnam has a really big bureaucracy and it has a lot of state employees. So it is just occurs quite natural for Vietnam that every government after đổi mới always brought up a topic of streamlining the apparatus, state apparatus, because it's just that's oversized and it just costs a lot of money without really any sense of efficiency. So it has always been a really big topic in Vietnam for the past 4 decades, and I think since the early 1990s, there have been four waves of administrative reforms, and it's just going nowhere. And so that's Tolam's proposal for administrative reform is not something new. But I think what is new is that the political determination of this effort, especially if you look at the way and the pace, the speed, and the scale of the reform proposals that has been uh, brought to the National Assembly and to this party's Central Committee by Tolam and Prime Minister Phạm Minh Chính. And I think it's very interesting to see the perfect duo between Tolom and Phạm Minh Chính as well, because we have heard a lot of rumor, of course, about Phạm Minh Chính was maybe alleged to be involved in anti-corruption investigations. But if you look at the way that Tolom has been working quite well with Phạm Minh Chính in bringing out this proposal and in pushing the state apparatus to work really hard on this proposal. I think they are quite, in sync in the effort to accelerate the proposal. So I think the Tolam is new, and it just unrealistic to expect that this is something that Tolam wanted to do for a long time, right? Because if you look at the way that he rose to power is very coincidentally because of the all of those turbulence and uncertainties happen in Vietnamese politics. But then this bureaucratic reform has been the staple of Phạm Minh Chính political career, especially when he was the party chief of Quảng Ninh province. He initiated a lot of ideas about reforms, how to merge different departments at the provincial level. And that also explains why he was elected to be the prime minister, because there was a really strong sense of the need of reform in 2021 when Phạm Minh Chính was elected as the prime minister, because many Central Committee members wanted him to carry out the reform at the national level. But of course, because of all of those political turbulence, Phạm Minh Chính didn't have the political capital to carry out that reform. So when Tolam came into power, with his determination and also with his political capital, it was possible for Tolam and Phạm Minh Chính to work together and put forward a really radical reform to streamline the bureaucracy. So now when we talk about the bureaucratic reform and this proposal, I think there are a lot of things that we can talk about. But I think what is most important that potentially has been brought about by Vietnamese media as well is that there is the talks about merging a lot of important ministries and also party institutions. So now we have it's a very big ministry. The Ministry of Finance, for example, will be merged with the Ministry of Planning and Investment. And then there will be the merge of the Ministry of Home Affairs and Ministry of Labor and all sort of thing. And also previously we only talked about merging state institutions, different departments or different ministries coming together into forming one agency. But in this proposal, what is very striking for me is that there also proposal to merge party institutions as well, which is quite rare, because I think what has kept Vietnam from implementing a very radical reform in the bureaucracy is that there's always a need of ideological alignment. So you have to keep the party on intact, because you want the party state continues the road to socialism. You don't want it to be detached and to be more capitalistic. But now Tolam is totally disregard all of those concerns about ideological alignment, and he tried to merge some very important party institutions, which he considered as surplus to duty, especially the propaganda commission will be merged with the mass mobilization commissions, and all sort of those things. He also abolished some top theoretical journals, to merge into, I think, 5 into 1, and also many of these television channels also be merged into Vietnam television. So I think what is very, very interesting here is that the whole proposal is very pragmatic. You have some surpluses. You have very, let's say, an oversight system with the party interstate with the same responsibility. So why keep all of those surpluses? So he just look at from a very pragmatic point to streamline the bureaucracy without a lot of considerations on ideology, which was I think which was something that prevent Vietnam from making such radical reforms in the past 4 ways of administrative reforms. And more importantly is that, of course, we going to discuss about this later, but the timeline is very quick. It's something that coming out of the blue, right? Because Tolam was, first elected in early August, and then, you know, 2 or 3 months later, he talking about, okay, we coming to Vietnam coming to a new era, kỷ nguyên vươn mình. Vietnam would need to, streamline the bureaucracy to make it, possible to go to this, this new era. And then boom, you have this very, very, very radical proposal and very, very, I would say, very short timeline for everyone in the system. Vietnamese bureaucracy is a huge system with, I think, 6 or 7 million people in the state apparatus, and you want to chop it down, and the timeline for making the detailed plan is only 1 month. It's just crazy to think about that, right? So yeah, I think it's there's a lot of things going on, but that's what I have observed so far from the radical reform that Tô Lâm Phạm Minh Chính proposed in the past few months.
Yeah, it's a great big picture look at it. And it certainly seems to be at least attempting to address a lot of what we've been hearing about, for years now, I suppose, but both from public officials and, FDI, foreign businesses that, different ministries, one project will have 5 or 6 ministries will have some form of responsibility over it. And you don't know who to get approval from. Even officials within the government get confused. So as a result, you have these like very slow public budget disbursement that has been also gotten a lot of attention in media this year, especially here in Ho Chi Minh City. They're kind of just not spending the money they have. But again, whether or not all of this reform happens is an open question, but it certainly seems like there's a lot of buy-in from across the, national down to provincial level. I mean, departments of cities are proposing cutting people and merging things. It's almost like they've created a bit of like a race to see who can cut the most, and in some way. Why do you think, or how do you think this has gotten so much, at least publicly so far, support?
Well, I think obviously, if you live in Vietnam for so long, you always see that bureaucracy is just oversized, right? Like you said, yes, that's too many people making decisions, and then it just delays the decision to be made because no one wants to take responsibility, especially during some politically sensitive times like the anti-corruption, during the anti-corruption campaign. And secondly, it just costs too much for the state budget. You have 6 or 7 million public employees, and not to mention many work in security and military apparatus, which would not be counted. And so you have around like 10 or 15% of the Vietnamese working population works in the bureaucracy. And every year the state spend at least 70% of the money for just maintaining the bureaucracy. So there's just no money left to spend on infrastructure, on education, on healthcare. And given that Vietnam wants to move forward with the new era that Tô Lâm defines, there's no way for it to defer the need to reform the bureaucracy any longer. They have to cut down the bureaucracy to have more resources for any other things that they want to invest, and also to raise the salary standard inside the system, because otherwise it's really hard for you to really encourage people to work in the state bureaucracy because the salary is just miserably low. The Tô Lâm, for example, he only got like 21 or 22 million Vietnamese dong per month. So it's, I think, less than let's say, 900 US dollars per month. It's just extremely low, and there's no motivation for you to work in such system. So then also because of that, there would be kind of like temptation for them to to do something wrong, like take bribes and to mismanage the state funds because you have to leave. You if you don't earn enough from their formal salaries, then you would have some kind of like pocket money by briberies or whatever else that you have. And so the need to reform is real and it has been there for so long, and you just need a really strong, determined leader to do that. And secondly, we see that only a year into the next Congress, right? So it's a very sensitive time, but also very good time as well because like now, if you do it right at this moment, and then from 2026, when you have a kind of like new era under Tolam, and then everything would be ready. The system would be ready to do whatever Tolam wants in terms of pursuing Vietnam's social and political goals. And so it's important to try it, to strike when the iron is still hot. And now you have the political capital when, all other factions are weakened because of the anti-corruption campaigns. You have the support from the prime minister who also wants to carry out the administrative reform. You have the full support from the population. And so, why not? Why not? Right. So I think that's all of those things. The timing is good, the support is right, and the political situation is right as well. I think it's just all of those factors contribute to explain why there is a time for Tolam and for Phạm Minh Chính to really accelerate the reform of the bureaucracy.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about the timing a bit more. As you mentioned, there is the National Congress coming up in, I guess, January 2026, when the new leadership will be selected. Although I suppose Lam is pretty well entrenched right now as General Secretary. My understanding is that, perhaps you could expand on this, is that traditionally not a whole lot gets done kind of in the year coming up to a Congress. There's a lot of positioning for leadership positions, and there's a lot of just things that need to be done before this big event happens every 5 years. Meanwhile, you have this streamlining coming down with a very aggressive timeline of within the first quarter of next year. So in some ways, I mean, it almost might seem like an unstoppable force meeting an immovable object or something like that. But you just said you think this is pretty good timing. So does that mean there may be a little bit less delay in decision making in the year before this Congress? I guess maybe because there is kind of new leadership already.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's important to note that, like I said, all the previous norms and regulations in Vietnamese politics have been broken down during the past few years because the anti-corruption campaigns and all of the political turbulence have changed all the norms and regulations. So previously, before a year till the Congress and a year after the Congress, normally people just do nothing because a year before the Congress you still have to wait and see who gonna get elected, who is out, and a year after you will have to kind of like strengthen the bureaucracy so that you can work. But for now, I think because I think Tolom is very secure in his position, and like I said, he was very smart by installing a lot of his strong proteges and associates in very important positions in the Central Inspection Commission, Ministry of Public Security, in the Central Committee's staff office, and so now he can actually put put forward the idea, a very radical idea of reforming the bureaucracy without a lot of resistance from the bottom up, from the people who can be make redundant because of his reform. So I think it's very important to see that the decision to have a new leader was made in August, and that leader Tolam will be 99% maintain his position after 2026. So I think that makes a really perfect timing for Tolam to read right now because normally during the party congress there would be a change of guards, right? You would have to remove or to change the leadership at all levels, from the central level to the provincial level and to the local level. And if you want to make any realistic change, there is a very good time to make because when you merge, for example, when you merge the two ministries, if if you do that in normal time, you would have to really scratch your head and think about, okay, you have one new minister and then another one who is also central committee member. Like, what can I do with him, right? But now, when you have this kind of like party congress, on the motion, and then you can just, you know, give the other guy the choice to just retire after the congress, and the other guy will be the new minister of the merged ministries. So I think this is a really good time to streamline because, when you have a leadership transition from the central to to the local level, it's easy for you to remove somebody that you don't want, or somebody you think that could be a surplus to the duty. So yeah, I think it's a good time because of that, and because of the norm have changed, and that makes it easier for Tolom and for Phạm Minh Chính to really push this plan to into work in a very very rapid timeline.
And speaking of the ministries, I mean, you mentioned a few minutes ago, I think finance and planning and investment being merged. There are others. Would you mind? Could you kind of let's briefly run through the ones that may be merged, and I think one may be eliminated entirely.
Yeah, let me just have a quick look because it's really it's a lot.
Yeah.
It's not only one or two, but there will be 14 ministries to be merged into each other. So you have the Ministry of Transportation will be merged with the Ministry of Construction, which I think it makes sense because they are both doing infrastructure stuff. And then, like I said, the MPI, Ministry of um, Planning and Investment, merged with Ministry of Finance. That would be a super ministry because basically you hold both the power to disperse the public finance and the power to plan where and what to invest. So it will be very very important to see who would be the new minister of this super ministry. And then you have the very interesting merger of the Ministry of Information and Communications with the Ministry of Science and Technology. It's interesting because many of the newspapers in Vietnam are registered under those two ministries. And also because of the proposal require that each ministry will only have one newspaper, and so there would be a lot of scrapping uncertainties among many big newspapers in Vietnam on how and what kind of future will be brought onto them. I would take one example. So now we have VN Express, of course, is the biggest online newspaper in Vietnam, and Vietnamnet also, potentially top three, most popular online newspaper in Vietnam. Vietnamnet belongs to Ministry of Information and Communication, and VN Express is registered under the Ministry of Science and Technology. So when those two merge, then you have to make Vietnamnet and VN Express becoming one single entity, and that doesn't make sense, right? And it's really caused a lot of concerns and uncertainties among many of the journalists. So that's one example, and then you have other mergers like Ministry of Labor, Invalids and Social Affairs merged into the Home Affairs, and then you have other important state institutions which will be abolished, especially the state agencies that controls the state-owned enterprises will be abolished. The National Finance Committee will be abolished. And then you look at the party from the party side, you have a very interesting case of the External Affairs Commission, which play an extremely important role when Vietnam upgraded the bilateral tie with the US in 2023. That commission was the main factor in promoting the upgrading of the tie because both the Ministry of Foreign Affairs actually was in this array because we have the corruption campaign. So that External Affairs Commission will seat activities, and then of course the mergers of the Propaganda Commission into the Mass Mobilization Commission. And so the scale is just huge. And I mean, if I have to memorize it, I would say it's really difficult and it would take a lot of time to
Yeah.
memorize all of that. But I think what important is that the consequences of those mergers and abolishment of some state entities have not been fully understood, and which is very important because it's not only about the agencies, and it's not only about thousands of state employees will be made redundant, but I think it would have very big consequence to the political arrangement of Vietnam as well. Let's take one example. So previously, normally you have a minister of any ministry in Vietnam would be a central committee member. So now we have around like 60, 65, or 67 central committee members are from provinces, and around 30 are from the government. But when you merge all of those things, then you have, let's say, half of those central committee, membership position would not be there longer, right? So then the political system actually would be consolidated with less central committee members if there is no change, of course, in terms of membership whatsoever. And that also affects the delegations who can join the National Party Congress. So in Vietnam, we see um, democratic centralism principle. So you have the Party Congress is the most important institution. So it meets every 5 years, and it has around 1,500 delegates. And all of those delegates will be chosen from different party cells among different ministries, provinces, and party organizations. So when you merge all of those parties, state institutions and party institutions, those party cells have to merge as well. So now, for example, previously you have, let's say, 15 party delegations to go to the party congress. Now you only have like 6 or 7. And then what happens to all those, delegation members? Or do you have still have like 1,500 delegates, or now you only have, let's say, 800? And that, of course, would have a huge consequence to whatever would be passed in the National Party Congress. So I think the consequences are not fully understood yet, even with the people within the system. So I think it's very interesting to see how they would figure out all of those things when they continue this plan, especially there has been a recent announcement of another yet extraordinary central committee meeting in early February to discuss all of that. So I really looking forward to see what kind of solutions that the party um, leadership will will offer to solve all of those problems that might arise from the bureaucratic reshuffling plan.
Yeah, and speaking of consequences, I've seen a little bit about this. I mean, I know it's still early on in the planning, but I mean, you mentioned redundancy, but tens of thousands, I don't know, maybe hundreds of thousands of people are going to lose their job if this goes through. Have you seen much discussion about that? I mean, obviously, the economy here is doing pretty well, so I'm sure there are jobs available, but that's putting a lot of people out of work. I understand the benefit of having less bureaucracy, but what kind of discussions have you seen about that?
Obviously, I mean, like, at least Vietnam is more, let's say, we have more freedom to speak in Vietnam than in China. So if you look at all of those discussions on social media now in Vietnam, especially among the people who work for the state apparatus, it's really unsettling time for many state employees. And I haven't really had a lot of information from other sides, but a lot of my friends are journalists, and they work for both state-funded uh, news media like VTV or Vietnam News, and many of them will be made redundant. And then even journalists who work for commercially run entities like VN Express or Vietnamese, they are kind of like clueless about what kind of future that might bring to them. So I think many of them are feeling really uncertain and feeling really concerned about their futures. It, Vietnam's still a very big economy, and of course there are many job opportunities, but you only have like, let's say, 3 months or 4 months to think about your plan. It's just not realistic for anyone to really find a new job within such very short period of time. And secondly, I think it's important to note that the question is that, all right, you still have like, let's say, 7 million state employees, and you want to streamline for, let's say, for 3 million. But then the question is like, who gonna stay and who's not gonna leave, right? We don't really have really strong and solid criteria to evaluate the performance of state bureaucracy. So there would be a really big question about the efficiency of a streamlined bureaucracy, because if you pick the wrong person to stay, right? If you don't have any kind of like good criteria to determine who's going to stay and who's going to leave, and then you pick the wrong fruit. And the one who stay actually is really bad at their positions, and they're doing nothing. And I think it would exaggerate the problems in the bureaucracy. So the risk is there. It's good rationale to streamline the bureaucracy, but you must have a really strong and solid criteria to choose the right person to stay and to really make the one actually doing nothing. The prime minister used to say that around 30% of Vietnamese working in the state bureaucracy is that just coming to office and drink coffee and then picking their kids and then stay home, doing nothing basically. But how you can choose, how you can identify such person from the person who actually doing good job? I think it's a very, very big question. And the unsettling feelings among those state employees is not that they would have to be made redundant or they would have to find a new job, but whether the process would be fair and would be transparent. I think that's a very big question right now, not only for the people who observe this streamlined proposal like you and myself, but also for the state employees who are at risk of losing their jobs and even losing their retirement plans, because I have seen some proposals that offer cash for the people who want to just leave, for I think for a few hundred of million of Vietnamese dong, or even up to 100,000 US dollars. But then they have no retirement plan. Just take the cash and then do whatever you want. I think it would be very risky, right? So I think it's still overall, and I would totally agree with the rationale of the reform. But if you look into the details, and the devils are in the detail, it's important to see whether this process will be fair, will be transparent, and whether there is any alternative plan for thousands or even millions of state employees who are affected by this proposal.
That's certainly something to watch moving forward. So I suppose moving into our last question then, it seems like the streamlining will be the dominant political story here next year. I mean, of course, the anti-corruption campaign is ongoing, but seems to be a little bit less high profile these days. I guess that could change at some point. You never know. But what should people be looking out for next year? I mean, you mentioned this extraordinary Central Committee meeting in February. So I'm sure some news will come out of that. But what will you kind of be looking at in the coming months?
Yeah, I think it's important to note that next year could be uh, the very important year because it's a year that leads to the National Party Congress. So what I will be looking at is that what kind of policies, what kind of regulations that would be made in in the National Congress. So before that, there would be the Politburo, political reports and the reports on the party activities, something like that. So I would be really looking forward to read the draft of the political reports and all other documents that the party put forward for the public to read. So normally in Vietnam, is very transparent process. So you have a team of terrorists from the party who spend months or even years to write the political report, which actually kind of like master plan for the country in the next 5 years. And then they will put the draft to the public and to other institutions to read and to provide some questions, comments, recommendations to improve it. I think the draft of the political report will be out maybe by May next year. So I think that would be a very good time for us to read the draft political report. And then there will be a National Assembly meeting in May, of course, to maybe to approve or even to contest, if possible, any kind of like proposals from the bureaucratic reform plan. Because, like I said, in these reforms involve most of the reforms in the bureaucracy involve the state apparatus. So it would need to have the ratification from the National Assembly. So it would be very interesting to see that. And third, of course, like I said, is important to see how the process of choosing the delegations for the party congress will be taken place, because I think that would be a defining moment for Tolam to make it work. Because if he couldn't control the process of choosing the delegates for the National Party Congress, there might be some, let's say, wild card. Some things might be wrong in the National Party Congress, something that he might not like it, might happen if he cannot fully control the process of picking the delegates. Because, like I say, Vietnam still remains is a one-party state, but it has quite strong intra-party democracy. So the delegates can vote on anything, and so it's very important to see how he can balance the temptation to really accelerate the radical reforms and the very important political calendar in 2026. Because if you put the push the reform too rapid and, let's say, too radical, and if it might affect is the interest of some factions, and then those factions will say, well, I don't really want to stay in this kind of like political environment. I want to change, and there may be some risks for the people who carry out this reform, especially then Sector Lom and Prime Minister Phạm Minh Chính. So I think this is very important to see how they can define the selection process of the delegations. And then, of course, before the Congress, there always been from the previous party congresses, there would be always the selections of the new leaders from the new ministries. It would be very interesting to see like the new names from the new super ministries, and then the new names from other provincial party committees, especially very important local areas like Ho Chi Minh City and Hanoi, also, because they are Politburo members. So all of those things, personnel, politic reforms, and policy change, I think those are most important things that we can observe in the next year before the party congress. But of course, many surprising things have happened in the past before the congress. So that's something for us to have a look as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, whatever happens, no doubt it'll be fascinating, as this year has been as well. So, Zhang, I appreciate you coming back, and really appreciate your ability to kind of condense these complex issues and discuss them in a way that's pretty easy to understand. I hope listeners agree. I'm sure we'll have reason to have you back on sometime next year as well with the rate of change.
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah. I hope that Vietnamese politics will have more surprises for us, so we have more chance to discuss it.
That's it for this episode of the Vietnam Weekly podcast. Connect with the Vietnam Weekly on Threads, LinkedIn, or Instagram. Thank you so much for listening. Please rate or review the show on your preferred podcast platform, and see you next week.